I've observed this concept of choosing not to listen for a while now. To start talking about some of the things we can change as parents to potentially help with this listening strike, we first need to establish. I would like to break them down and talk about some of the ways I've started to or am attempting to work with my children. This has been one of the biggest changes I've made in regards to my parenting. Those were some of the instances where I see my children refusing to listen most commonly. The way I would answer the question of why your kids don't listen is with the following. This is Real People, Real Talk, Episode 1. Why your kids don't listen. Before beginning, I want to say I'm not an expert, just a real dad in the real world, sharing my thoughts and things that I've learned. I have 2 children, they're 6 and 4. I love them very dearly, and as such I spend a lot of time thinking about wanting them to be good kids, respectful, polite, helpful and kind. As a whole, they're amazing, they get on well with their friends and family, they are very polite most of the time. Other times they just need a little prompt, and they always get praised by their teachers for helping out in class, and they're incredibly kind when it really matters. Yet I feel there is one thing that needs to be better for both of them, and that is their listening skills, especially when they're asked to do something or to stop doing something that may result in an accident, or more importantly, to end a tantrum or a session of verbal dissatisfaction, for example, when they're whinging and whining. I've observed this concept of choosing not to listen for a while now, both in my children hands-on, seeing young families that I know, and also in interactions that I see from being in public spaces. Whilst it looks generally the same in most cases, I think it's important to remember that every child is different, and there may be different stimuli that are creating these scenarios. Having said that, I do believe that some of the amendments to our behaviors described in this video here have been of benefit in my household, and I hope it will be to others. To start talking about some of the things we can change as parents to potentially help with this listening strike, we first need to establish the instances we see this happening. For my kids, there could be many different situations, but some of the most common ones are running around and playing quite physically while being very loud, with absolutely no consideration to potential trip hazards or their surrounding. This is what I call the no care until injury concept. Their ability to stop listening after they have been told they cannot get what they want, resulting in a familiar chant of "but I want to," which then tends to not stop in its intensity until you seemingly give in to the demands, and if you don't, it will just escalate into an explosion of child rage. The "all I want to hear is yes" concept. And finally, the aftermath of trying to teach your children about what you would like them to do or how you would like them to act in a given scenario, but they are so worked up by that point that they just don't listen to anything you want to say. The turn down for what concept. Given that these are the ones I see most commonly, I would like to break them down and talk about some of the ways I've started to or am attempting to work with my children to get to a more peaceful end result. No care until potential injury. I think the first thing to say here is that I don't believe there is actually anything wrong with kids running around and playing loudly. In fact, some of that activity and the laughter that comes from that is quite joyful. The times it causes the most concern for parents would probably be if they are working from home, trying to concentrate on something or having a conversation, and this is happening at those times. In any case, the best thing to do with all of that energy is to redirect it, in my opinion. If it isn't at a time where it may cause a disturbance, then let the kids run wild for a while and just make sure they're not in danger. Here the redirection comes into play in terms of rearranging the environment. For instance, if your kids are playing catch in a crowded or smaller space, redirect this activity to a bigger space or outside if the weather permits, so energy can be burned and fun can be had with a lesser risk of damage or injury. If your kids are energetic and loud and you're having to work, then try and redirect that energy to a different activity that could be equally as fun and captivating for them, but ensures they are a little quieter when you need them to be. An example could be an activity book or coloring pictures that you have printed out. I have found that if you provide direction, they really want to do well and welcome the thought of being able to show their skills off to you when you are available again. I've also found that it's important to clearly articulate the plan. For instance, Mommy just has to do these work emails for the next half an hour. So take that time to complete these pages in your activity book, and I will let you know when I'm finished so you can show me what you have done. This certainly works better for my 6-year-old than it does with my 4-year-old, And if that is the case, the activity I've chosen for my 4-year-old is just not good enough. Not good enough to take up his attention for the given period of time. And in those cases, I will have to think of something better that will work for him. Moving on to the all I want to hear is yes concept. With this one, I found myself reflecting a lot, particularly around the reasons why I may be saying no to my kids. One of my biggest considerations with this was to get to a point where we say no less times in a day. I'll come back to this point a little later in the video and give you my thoughts as to why I think that's important. But in order to achieve saying no less times in a day, we had to set the expectations. And I found that some of these expectations were created by ourselves in most cases. For instance, my daughter would come home from school at 3 o'clock every afternoon. I had created an expectation that there would be a snack waiting for her in the car when she got in. Once eaten that snack, she had also created an expectation that when she gets home, she may find something to eat on the dining room table left over from either of us parents snacking while doing some work shortly before pickup. When she sees this, she will naturally ask to have some, and once whatever that has been devoured, a short while later she would say she's hungry again. At some point as a parent, you may lose patience and decide to say, no, you're not getting any more food. You will have your dinner soon. To which you are likely to be greeted by an annoyance and an upset voice saying, but I want to, I am hungry. Even though you and the rest of the world would wholeheartedly agree that there is no way that child can be hungry after all of the food that has already been consumed in a 90-minute period. Now add to that the possibility that while this is going on, you are on a work call or trying to concentrate on some emails or other type of activity. It then becomes really hard to deal with this, as well as a little embarrassing. One of the reasons why you would be more likely to give in to the demands. This scenario and exchange, for us, went on for a few weeks before we decided to start a process of changing the structure to one where she gets a snack when she gets home, and thereafter there is no more food until dinner time. And dinner time for her is the same time every day, therefore there is no surprises. With this new structure, after a week or two, we completely eradicated the tantrums because she's now fully aware when she will be getting the food that she needs to feel happy and content. And it also meant that we were more conscious to ensure that she has a dinner at the same time every day, rather than telling ourselves that she has eaten lots in school and can wait a little longer while we finish whatever we're actually doing. This did start off by us making sure not to leave anything in view of her when she returned from school, but now we've been able to get to a point that even if something is left out accidentally, she is more receptive to being told that it's not for her and that it's not long until her dinner time. This is a perfect example of reducing the times you're saying no to your child by understanding the needs that they have and putting a solution in place that works for all. As a whole, the all I want is yes concept, in my opinion, is one where your child asks for something or wants to do something or not do something, and unless your response is yes to them, they will get upset and make that clear until you change your response. I have found that in these scenarios, it is important to separate your feelings from your child's feelings. After all, the only person that really knows what they're feeling is themselves. Sometimes it may seem to us like it would be completely unreasonable to react to a certain scenario in a way that our children do. And I found myself in the past thinking or even saying things like, it can't be that bad, it's just a snack. Or, please don't be so dramatic. I started to realize that when I actually paid attention and acknowledged the feelings my children may have had, I had more chance to get through to them either at that moment or slightly later when things had calmed down a little. This may look something like this. My child says, I'm still hungry. I need something to eat now. And my response would be, I know you feel like you should have another snack and it feels like you are really hungry, but you've had a snack after school and it's not long until your dinner time now. I need to make sure that you don't fill yourself up on snacks so that you're still hungry for your evening meal. If you like, you can choose what snack you would like me to bring to school tomorrow instead. The result for me has been an agreement from my child pretty much instantly, rather than a continued chant of, but I want to, in a whiny voice. To give you another example, the other night the kids were watching a cartoon not long before bedtime. As one was coming to an end, my son said that he would like to watch another before going to bed. Unfortunately, we had already stayed up a little longer to watch the episode that he was watching, and the agreement was to go to bed after this one. My response, I know the program is really good, and sometimes you feel like you just want to keep watching to see what happens next. It is mummy and daddy's job to make sure that you get to bed on time so you can have enough sleep and be ready for the day tomorrow. And it's getting a little bit late now, so we need to go to bed. However, let's quickly choose the one you want to watch tomorrow evening before bed. Again, in this instance, agreement from my child was pretty much instant. Compared to what certainly would have ended up in tears if I would have chosen a response from my past, which would have sounded like, no, I already told you, this is the last one. It's time for bed now. Let's go. This has been one of the biggest changes I've made in regards to my parenting, and acknowledging my children's feelings not only feels like the right thing to do, but more importantly, it has a much better result than what I've been used to over the last few years. Lastly, the turn down for what concept. Before we can get into this one, I think it may be worth clarifying what I mean. There will be occasions where your child may have done something, said something, or acted in a way that wasn't as expected. In these instances, we may find ourselves in a gentle discipline mode. This could look something like, stop doing that before I count to 3, don't say that or I will take a particular toy away. Or in some cases, it may be removing the child from what they're doing for a bit of reflection time in a quiet space, a timeout. Our children don't like to be in trouble. I also think that they do not like the idea of being in the wrong in any way. So when they hear, see or feel that they're being disciplined, they tend to close off. And this means that sometimes a valuable lesson fails to be learned. Yes, of course, we could all get them back into the room after their reflection time and ask them why they think they were moved to a quiet corner in order for them to repeat it and show some sort of understanding. But if your children are like mine, 9 times out of 10, they say that they don't know and they have to be told. Having looked at this for a while now, I'm pretty confident that there will continue to be repeat instances of the same behavior, meaning the lesson was not learned. I've had those feelings about timeouts for a long time and never really bought into the idea of working for my children. Dr. Becky Kennedy wrote a great book called Good Inside, and her way of addressing unfavorable reactions from our children focuses mainly on the fact that our children are inherently good inside, and if they're doing something undesirable, it will most likely be due to their lack of ability to self-regulate their emotions. Reading the book really helped me to confirm the thoughts I had about parenting strategies and how changes needed to be made for us parents. These days, I'm leaning towards not using any of the before mentioned gentle disciplinary steps. In my experience, it may make a change in the moment, but does not seem to change anything over time. And I continue to see the same behaviors and reactions and maintain the aforementioned strategies over and over with no actual learns for my children. I started to look at it in a different way. I know that my children are inherently good, deep down, and if they're acting in an unfavorable manner or doing something that they know is wrong, there must be something happening inside for them that is causing this. Overall, with this scenario, we really need to understand why the behavior is being chosen by our kids. In some cases, it might be something they have seen and picked up, and by understanding this, we are able to explain to them that this is not the way to act in that particular instance, and show them how they should act. Other times, there may be something else that is bothering them, and they're choosing to act the way they're acting because of that. Here it is important to get to the root cause and support in whatever way we can. That way we can then address the behavior and show them that talking about what is bothering them is a better way forward. What I have found most important is to allow my kids to feel what they feel rather than trying to tell them how they should feel. At this age, I don't believe that my children are in a position to know what to do with all their emotions. They're still struggling with what they should do with shame, anger, sadness, disappointment, and whatever else. Most times, all of the above can result in crying, shouting, or lashing out. To give you a recent example, my daughter was due to have some Easter activities at school. One of the things she had to prepare was a decorated hard-boiled egg to take into school so they could complete an activity where they rolled the egg down a hill to see which travels the furthest. When she came home from school, I presented her with a hard-boiled egg to decorate. She did this to her satisfaction and was very proud of her art. When my son came home from preschool a little while later, he saw the egg and decided to destroy it angrily, to the obvious horror of my daughter. Now in the past, I would have been quite frustrated and would have told him something like, "This is really bad, you shouldn't have done that." And even, "Go and sit on timeout and think about what you just did." This probably would have pacified my daughter a little to see that the act did not go unpunished. However, I don't believe that it would change the behavior in long term, nor do I believe that the opportunity was maximized to its full potential. Instead, I set out to understand what made my loving and caring son want to do something so unkind. I removed him from the situation, making sure he knew he was not in trouble and that we were just going to talk. I asked him why he did that and also what he felt. He indicated that he felt sad, and I asked whether he was sad because his sister got to decorate an egg and he did not. My son was actually feeling a little jealous. He felt like he had missed out while he was at preschool. I told him it was okay to feel a little sad, but rather than destroying something someone had made, the better thing to do is to speak to his mum or dad and tell us that he's feeling that way. If he would have done that, we could have provided an egg for him to decorate too. He said he understood and told his sister he was sorry. Now at this stage, it was also important to do the same with my daughter, as she felt very sad about what happened in the moment too. The conversation was similar, and again the tears stopped a lot quicker than in the past, and we ended on an agreement to boil another 2 eggs so both could decorate them and have one each. I know it may seem counterintuitive to tell my son that he was not in trouble at that moment, but he already knew he did something wrong. If I would have just told him to come with me, he would have been certain that he is in trouble and that he may even end up on a timeout. By telling him that we were just going to talk, he doesn't let his imagination run wild of what bad experiences to come, and he is more open to actually talking about how he felt in the moment and why he did what he did. The other thing that was important for me to learn from that is how, as a parent, I could have avoided that scenario altogether. Going forward now, I'm aware that my son seeing his sister show off an egg that she decorated while he was occupied at preschool would make him feel a little left out, and I can do more to preempt that feeling and address it at first point of contact. Those were some of the instances where I see my children refusing to listen most commonly, and also some of the changes I have made in my behavior towards them. Since the time that I've made a conscious effort to look at these scenarios differently, I have had much more success in getting through to my children, even at the times where I used to believe there was no getting through to them at all. I also want to share some other changes I have made through some observations which have certainly continued to help with my kids choosing not to listen. A recurring observation that I've had is around our attention as parents. If we are giving our children half our attention at normal times, but all of our attention when they do something undesirable, then for the child that craves attention from us, it may become a pretty easy choice to do something unruly in order to have full focus on them. As an example, as parents, we're always busy and doing something for our kids or the household, or maybe just responding to important notifications. And at those times, I used to find myself letting my child try to get my attention multiple times before saying, "1 second, son, let me just finish this and I'll come back and speak to you." Or if I'm having a conversation, it used to be, "Hang on a second, son, I'm just talking to your mum," after being called multiple times because I felt it was obvious that I was preoccupied. Nowadays, I make sure to acknowledge my children straight away. And if I am busy or having a conversation, I will tell them that, and will also tell them when I will pick the conversation back up. This is never any longer than a few moments because my children are learning so much every day, and if I want them to learn the right things, I feel like I have to make that switch. Equally, I work hard to ensure that I'm not saying things multiple times. For instance, if asking my daughter to get dressed for school, we used to be in a scenario where we would ask once but see no action, then ask again and again until you get to a point where it's time critical, and maybe use a sterner voice to say, "I have asked multiple times, now get your clothes on." I felt that this almost created a habit of not having to take action until the request reached the stern voice level. Instead now, I ask her to get ready, pause for a moment to see if there's any movement, then say something along the lines of, "We only have X amount of time. Please get yourself ready because I'm going to be doing X now, and we need to be dressed by the time that is done." I will then leave her to it, and by the time I'm back, she will be halfway into getting dressed every time. For me, that was a really important switch in my behavior towards those situations. This also became very useful when asking my children to do something they didn't really want to do at the time, like leaving the park when it was time to go home, for instance. I would set the scene by saying, "We have 5 minutes left, then we are leaving." Then say, "It's time now, kids, let's get home for dinner." Following this, I would introduce a pause to see what the response was. Then say, "Remember we agreed 5 minutes. Don't get me wrong here. If the activity we're doing is really fun, there may still be some pushback of not wanting to leave, regardless of the 5-minute agreement. But if it does end up in some whining or some whinging of I don't want to leave the park, I would use a response of I know you don't want to leave the park. The park is fun, and sometimes we wish we could spend all evening here. But we do have to go home and have our dinner, so let's do that, and we can come back to the park the next time the weather is this good. The difference here is that I put a little more time and thought into my responses, rather than leading with the first thing that comes to mind. The first thing that came to mind in the past has always been something that would not take into consideration how my child feels about leaving the park, but focus more on my belief of how they should be happy about the fact that we even came to the park on a busy afternoon. I would also like to loop back to the point around saying no less times to our children. This thought process came from me becoming conscious of how many times we're actually saying no to our children for what they may ask. I felt like our kids were already getting ready to battle for their request before they voice it because they got so used to being told no. I'm not talking about the times my child would ask for sweets at the worst possible moment, or when there is a request to have every toy in the shop, but more about the day-to-day activities. Thinking about the instances that I was saying no to my children, I was able to identify that a lot of the time it was for my own convenience. For example, if I was asked whether the kids could play with a particular toy 20 minutes before bedtime, I would think about the fact that it needed to be dug out the toy box, maybe set up, and then given the limited time available to do all that, I would most likely say no, or we could do that tomorrow instead. If I did that for multiple requests in a day, depending on my circumstances, I would end up saying no more times in a day than I would say yes. The other part of this that was interesting to me was the fact that as a parent, it seems sufficient to say no without an explanation. Or I've also heard a lot of times parents saying no, and when asked why by their children, just saying, because I said so. I now believe it is much more appropriate to lead with the explanation rather than the word no if you really have to deny your child's request. By saying yes more, I believe my children are much more engaged in asking for permission, and I'm able to keep the dialogue alive as to why it may not be the right time for a specific activity, teaching them the reasons for that. In some ways, it also feels less likely that they will just do something regardless of permission. Most importantly, I think that as they get older, they'll be told no by life many times. And it's a great idea to maintain their mindset of curiosity and also encourage them to understand the reasons so that they can accept it. I want them to grow up questioning those reasons and learn how to work towards achieving what they want by compromising. Now, before I say no, I think about whether it is really an unreasonable ask or whether I believe it may just be too much effort and oversight for me. These are the years of build mode for my children, so I want to make sure the foundations are strong. In summary, in my opinion and observations, the way I would answer the question of why your kids don't listen is with the following. 1. Your child probably not knowing what their feelings inside mean and working through that in their head while you may be talking. 2. Your child feeling like they're not being heard themselves. 3. Being worked up so much that now it is difficult to regulate emotions and really wanting your help with that, but not knowing how to ask or express that. 4. Knowing that listening to you means that they will need to stop doing something that is really fun and not really getting an explanation as to why, or maybe just not wanting to accept the explanation as to why they need to stop. And 5, us assuming that our children are aware that what we are saying is for their own good, when we really have not made that information clear with them. Let me also summarize some of the actions that I have taken to help with this in my household and with my children. Number 1, increasing the time between my child doing or saying something and me reacting. I try to take an extra moment before initial reaction to allow me to consider what my child may be feeling. Always questioning what's happened before this. 2, listening and acknowledging what my children are saying, and in most cases waiting for them to finish rather than trying to guess what they are saying or finishing their sentences, regardless of whether this makes the exchange longer. I think that this not only helps them to find their voice and encourage communicating their thoughts and feelings fully, but also shows that you are fully engaged and listening rather than sending the message of, hurry up and say what you want to say. 3, removing my child from the area where the emotion regulation struggle is happening to a quieter place and sitting with them until they have calmed down a little by just saying, once you're ready, we can talk about it. The crying/shouting eventually stops, and then I ask if they're ready to talk. Number 4, always leading with why I'm saying no, with all of the factors that I've considered, and then offering an alternative. Sometimes this may end like, we either leave the park now as we agreed so we can get home for dinner, or we will have to think really hard about coming back to the park next time because it's so difficult for us to want to stop playing. Whilst I'm purposely making an easy decision for them and the outcome that I want, I'm still giving them the power to make the choice rather than enforcing that playtime is over. 5. Being conscious of articulating my role as a father in keeping my children safe and healthy. For instance, it is my job to make sure that you don't fill yourself up on snacks before you have your dinner. Or, it is my job to make sure you're safe while walking across the road, so please hold my hand until we get to the other side. And finally, an important one, not getting to a point where my anger shows up in raising my voice or getting so frustrated that I am the one that's acting unfavorably by snapping in any way. I want to display the behavior that I want to see from my children. This one is hard to get used to. Our children and how they are is so personal to us. They are almost an extension of who we are, and how they behave can be seen as a visual display of our parenting. Therefore, when they act annoying, especially in public or in front of friends and family, it can be quite frustrating and embarrassing. I believe what's more important for us and our children is how we deal with that and how our actions then get our children back to a normal, calm state as quickly as possible. My experience of paying attention to those and also changing some of the before listed ways of dealing with my children has significantly impacted how we communicate. It has also allowed me to feel as though my children have become better at expressing their feelings and thoughts, and most importantly, it has made me a more conscious parent. I used to think that I had to raise my voice to get my children to listen, but now even if my child gets really angry and shouts at me, I am able to tell them that I don't shout at them, so they shouldn't shout at me. We need to remember that our children will mirror our behavior. We are their natural role models. We portray how to act and react in situations. If I don't like my child acting in a certain way, I need to make sure I don't either. I hope that some of the things that I have come to learn will be thought-provoking for those of you who have watched this, and I would love to hear your thoughts on how you have dealt with these situations throughout your parenting journey. Thank you very much for watching this video, and we hope to see you again soon.